Today we're going to talk about slope, and slope can be used to describe a rate of change. Slope describes how steep a line is. So if you look at the slope of a line and its absolute value, the greater the absolute value, the steeper the line. So when we look at this over here, remember that we read a graph from left to right. Just like we read a book, we read a graph from left to right. And so if we look at our examples here, the first example, right here, from left to right, the line is going upward. And consequently, because the line is going upward, we can say that our slope is, anybody know? Increasing. What's another way we could say it? Positive. And I like the increasing, but we want to get a little bit more specific here. A positive slope. And consequently, if we're reading the graph from left to right, and on example 2, our line kind of goes downhill, downward, uphill is positive, so downward must be negative. Our third example, a horizontal line. Horizontal line. Anybody remember what the slope of a horizontal line is? Tiffany? It is. And finally, vertical line. What's the slope of a vertical line? Tiffany? And it is. Vertical line. It's like walking into a wall. You can't. So it's unfun. Well, there's just a little bit of the basics and one more thing I forgot. A vertical line fails the vertical line test for being a function. It's still a line. It's just not a function. And remember, for function, that there is exactly one x assigned to each y. What might make more sense to you is that there's no repeats in x. That's how we can look and say that something is a function. The x cannot repeat. The y can repeat, the x cannot repeat. Slope formula now. Well, again, slope is defined as rise over run. We graphed a line last week, and we had to know that the definition of slope is rise over run. It can also be written as triangle x over triangle y. That triangle stands for the Greek letter delta, delta x divided by delta y. And it simply means the change in x over the change in y, which has been described to you before. And sorry, we have a typo here. I just now remember that this is really delta y over delta x. I'll try to write that a little bit better. Delta y divided by delta x. But the formula, fortunately, is correct. It is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. If you had Miss Myers for geometry, she likes to do y sub 1 minus y sub 2 over x sub 1 minus x sub 2. That works fine. It's fine. So I just want to recognize that she does it slightly different, and there's no issue there. But when we calculate our slope here on these next problems, on our examples, I can recommend to you to label the points. So here's x1 and here's y1. Here's x2 and there's y2. And your formula's right there on the paper. Let's fill this into the formula. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1 divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Well, 2 minus 3 is negative 1. 4 minus 2 is 2. Again, I hope it looks familiar to you. We'll label the point. Points, plural. And then we're going to fill it into the formula. Nice that your formula is right there on the paper. X sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. And then we're going to fill these values in. Delta y over delta x. Negative 3 minus 4 over negative 1 minus 3. Well, negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. What happens when we have negative 7 divided by negative 4? Matthew? They can both be negative, but what's negative divided by negative? Positive. And we'll go to best. So, problem number 3. Let's label. It's a little bit blurry. But here's x1 and y1, x2 and y2. If you don't like the fractions, most of you have your calculators out, so that should be helpful. We get 1/6 minus 1/6, y2 minus y1, and then we get negative 3/4 minus 1/3. And the nice part is, what's 1/6 minus 1/6? 0. You don't need to type that in. Now, if you need to type in this bottom part, then we go to our calculator. Remember, the fraction button on the calculator is alpha y equals, unless you have the Inspire. But we can do negative 3 negative 3 over 4, and then minus alpha y equals number 1, to get the fraction, 1/3, and then when we've got that typed in, we can get our answer here of negative 13/12. 0 divided by negative 13/12. And I got a 0 here. If you don't know, use your calculator. Whoops, wrong button there, but 0 divided by negative 13/12. Doesn't like the 3 right now. 3. And we do get 0. Just like we were told. Problem number 4. Oh, by the way, what kind of line has slope of 0? It's a horizontal line. Now, you don't have to know that, but I'm going to just reinforce that topic. Problem number 4. Let's label the point. And then, once we've got it labeled, we'll fill it into our slope formula there on our paper. And what we have is x1 and y1 x2 and y2, and we're going to fill these values back into our formula. 0 minus 4 divided by 2 minus 2, and we get negative 4 divided by 0. What's negative 4 divided by 0? Matthew? Hayden? It actually is undefined. And let's look at our calculator again. Tiffany, what kind of line is that? This is going to be a vertical line. Again, I'm just going to reinforce that. But when you type this in your calculator here, negative 4 divided by 0 gives us an error. Error divided by 0. So if we get an error divided by 0, that's a clue that that means that our line has a slope that's undefined. But there's the slope. y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Problem number 5, you cannot see this value over here. I'm really sorry. So I'm just going to write it off to the side here as m equals 1/3. But this time what's happening on these problems is that we know the slope. And by the way, I need to write one more thing. And that is that m is the abbreviation for slope. We are given that value of slope. We need to come up with the missing part of the point. So let's go back and label our points again. And fill in our formula. And it is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1 equals the slope of 1/3. We can simplify that a little bit more. And we have r minus 4 divided by negative 6 equals 1/3. Jordan? I mean, you couldn't see this, so I had to tell you what it was. So, which part are you looking at for the 1? y2 minus y1, there's the 4, over x2 minus x1. Are you seeing it? So once we simplify that denominator, then do we have a solving technique to help us figure out what is the value of r, since we already know what the slope is? Well, the technique that I like is cross multiplying. And if we cross multiply, we're going to multiply these two values together. And we're going to multiply these two values together. And when we multiply those values together, then we end up with 3 times r minus 4 equals negative 6 times 1. And it doesn't matter. You can have negative 6 times 1 on the other side and 3 times r minus 4 on its other side. We just need to multiply these two parts together and these two parts together. Once we have that, then we can figure out what r is using the distributive property in our solving technique. We get 3r minus 12 equals negative 6. When we add 12 to both sides, we have 3r equals positive 6. And finally, it's 3 times r. Opposite operation is to divide by 3. R equals 2. Again, we knew the slope, and we had to figure out a part of the point, is what we were figuring out. And we're going to do that again in the next problem. We can see our point a little bit better this time. We have x1 and y1, x2 and y2. And once again, we're filling in y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 equals f. If you don't know that formula, then what I can recommend is that you write it down every time you do a problem. So when we fill these values in, we get negative 4 minus 6, y2 minus y1, over x2 minus x1. There's that r again. That's the value that we need to find, minus negative 2 equals m, which is negative 5. And by the way, we can write this negative 5 as negative 5 over 1. What happens when we have two negatives together? It becomes positive. So let's simplify where we can simplify, which is the negative 4 minus 6, which is negative 10. We took care of the minus and negative 2, and we came up with r plus 2, and that equals negative 5 over 1. And let's cross multiply to solve. So it's this times this, and it's this times this. Negative 10 times 1 equals negative 5 times r plus 2. And then we can solve. Negative 10 times 1 is negative 10. Negative 5r, when we use distributive property, minus 10. Negative 5 times 2. And then we want to solve. We're trying to solve for r. What does r equal? So let's move the 10 away from the r by adding it to both sides. And we get 0 equals negative 5r. And then it's negative 5 times r. Opposite operation is to divide by negative 5. And what did we say happens when we divide 0 by a number? Do we get 0 or do we get undefined? We get 0. Again, if you're not sure, type it in your calculator. Your calculator will tell you what it is. So there's one more slide here. This is just a summary of what we were just talking about. Positive slope, an uphill slope, reading the graph from left to right. Negative slope, reading the graph from left to right. It goes downhill. Horizontal has a slope of 0, and vertical has a slope that's undefined.